My name is Esther Miriam Wagner. I'm the Executive Director of the Woolf Institute, and I would like to welcome you all to our new webinar series entitled Binging Religion. And I've just looked through the names list here on my screen, and I can see that quite a few of you have already joined us for our previous Bringing the Shrine Home series last week. Welcome back to all of you. I can also see some names of colleagues. Hello, it's very nice to see you there. And we're also happy that we have many newcomers who are joining us for this current series. For those of you who are new to these webinars and not yet familiar with the Woolf Institute, we are a research institution. We're focusing on religion and society. And we combine our research with teaching, with public education, and with policy work to foster understanding between people of different beliefs and of no belief. Generally speaking, religion in the secularized West, in Western Europe, is not really part of daily life, and this is very much in contrast with the rest of the world, particularly in the global South, where large majorities of people identify as being religious and where religion dictates all aspects of life. There's a sort of a census by the Pew Institute that 84% of all people in the world identify as religious. And in this sense, we in the West, we are quite what they call weird, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So we're the weird ones, we're the odd ones out in the world. So for us, seeing this rise of Netflix programs that focus on the strictly Orthodox religious communities naturally caught our attention. And so we thought that over the next 3 weeks, we'll have a weekly webinar on Thursday afternoons, where we focus on the relationship between faith and society through the exploration of various Netflix series. This week, we will begin with Unorthodox. And if you haven't watched the series Unorthodox, then perhaps you pause here and then watch the video of this later on Facebook, because I think there will be quite a few spoilers. The gist of the series follows Esti, who is a 19-year-old Jewish woman who runs away from her Satmar Hasidic community in Williamsburg, New York. She runs away to Berlin, and there she adopts a secular lifestyle and pursues her love for music. The series is loosely based on Deborah Feldman's autobiography, Unorthodox, The Scandalous Rejection of My Religious Roots. And we're very, very pleased to have in the panel with us today Yaron Peleg, who is a reader in modern Hebrew studies at the University of Cambridge. He's an expert in Israeli cinema and in Israeli film. And apparently it's his first webinar, so a very warm welcome to Yaron. Our second speaker today is Alissa Symon, who is the Jewish co-chaplain at the University of Cambridge, and she's also a research assistant, my research assistant here at the Woolf Institute. And we also have with us Tara Zamet, the Woolf Institute communications officer, who's facilitating the webinars and troubleshooting in the background. She's not showing herself, but she's with us, I can assure you. So at the Woolf Institute, we do like to present topics in a very concise, very accessible fashion. And we found that slots of speaking of 6 minutes are ideal. And for our speakers, I have also these little handy signs, basically telling them when they have 2 minutes left and when they should better stop speaking. And after that, we'll have a 25-minute question and answer section. You can then type your questions in the Q&A portal on your screens, and I will read them out and then direct them to the relevant speakers. So we'll open with Yaron. I'm handing over to Yaron, Dr. Yaron Peleg.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you very much. Lovely to be here. I finished watching the series last night and thought it was very interesting because about a year or so ago, I completed a study of Orthodox cinema in Israel, and I think it's interesting the way it ties into it. I would say that in an unusual sort of different, usually it's the opposite. The Netflix is a bit lagging behind Israel, which began in earnest to show the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community in cinema already in the early 2000s. In fact, the first ever Orthodox, not ever, but the first Orthodox film that launched this new interest in the Haredi community was in 2004, a film that I think a lot of people have seen, had a lot of exposures around the world, Ushpizin, that came out at that time. And that film in 2004 represented the renewed, not even renewed, I would say the discovery of movie-going audiences in Israel of a community that was until then very rarely portrayed in cinema, and when it was portrayed very negatively. And that film I mentioned, Ushpizin, from 2004, was one of the first films that began a really interesting trend in Orthodox cinema in Israel. And I want to tie it in a minute to Unorthodox as well, and show you a little bit the genealogy of this trend. I think it's in many ways a trend. That film was so successful, it was followed later on by several other films. Some of them include two films by the Haredi director Rama Burstein. The name, you probably know the names of the films: Fill the Void from 2012 and The Wedding Plan from 2016. And these films were followed then by a successful cable series called Shtisel that was recently also broadcast on Netflix. But in Israel, it came out already in 2013. The interesting thing about these products, these cultural products, is that they focused on the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel, the Haredi community, and they were feel-good movies. And even more interesting, they were romantic comedies. Both, not both, all of these films I mentioned, Ushpizin, Fill the Void, The Wedding Plan, and Shtisel as well, are romantic comedies. And if you know anything about Israeli cinema, it's really unusual to have this genre. Israeli cinema is not very, has not produced a lot of these kind of films, except for the Burekas films in the 60s and 70s, but that's another case altogether. But these films, the way they have communicated with non-Orthodox audiences in Israel is by centering the plots generally on love stories between protagonists. This is very unusual in Israeli cinema, as I said. And Shtisel, I think, took it even further by basing an entire series on this sort of romantic conceit. And that, I think that's one of the reasons why these films have been so popular in Israel. And I think that popularity has also been responsible for the has been responsible for the new interest in this community as a subject for films. And we have seen in the last few years, not just in Netflix, of course, but also around the world. If anyone, in 2017, two films came out, Menashe, also based on in the Orthodox community in New York, and Disobedience, a lesbian love story based on a book by Naomi Alderman here in Britain. And there was also a documentary on Netflix, One of Us, from the same year, 2017. So all of these films, comprise, we can talk about a real trend that, as I said, began in a very certain way in Israel, and then overspilled to the rest of the world, first through festivals, and later on, because of the interest, I think Netflix picked up on this and tried to go with it as well and leverage it. Except, I mean, even I guess even this film, Unorthodox, is in some ways a feel-good film, and I tell you what I mean by this. All of these films that I've mentioned are also distinguished by the fact that they are made not for the consumption of the Orthodox community, which doesn't view films in the same way that secular people view films. It's much more restricted and it's done in different ways, and don't necessarily have access to these films. When they're on television, it's a little bit easier because Shtisel, for example, was sort of pirated in the Orthodox community and viewed sort of surreptitiously. But the other films, so all these films, including the Netflix series, are really made by insiders, usually by insiders from these communities who either left those communities and want to tell their stories, or want to build some kind of bridges between themselves and the secular community, not so much to proselytize, but in order to introduce them and make people and give people a good image of them. And I'll stop here and let my other panelists say what they want to say.
Thank you very much, Yaron. And I hand over to Alissa.
Great. Thank you. So this is really great, Yaron, because you and I are going to disagree, which is the best panel you can have. But we'll take it back a little bit and then you'll see why. So I too, like so many other viewers, I was completely hooked to this series, and I binged it in 2 sittings. I watched the whole thing in 2 days. And the problem was, while I was watching the series, me being an Orthodox woman, Jewish woman, I couldn't help but not notice many inaccuracies, even mistakes, and wonder about the meaning of these errors. Why was Netflix, that obviously hired people that knew the Satmar community, knew Yiddish, why was it making these mistakes? Why are there mistakes inside of the plot? And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk a little bit about the mistakes, and I'm going to talk about why I think they were planted in them and what we can learn about Unorthodox as a series, what it's trying to do, and how it's communicating things to its viewers. So the most blunt mistake actually happens already in the opening scene. If you remember, Esti can't leave her building because the Eruv, or if you want to call it the religious border, has fallen, meaning that during the Shabbos, during the Sabbath, she can't carry things outside of the house. The problem with this is that many ultra-Orthodox community, and specifically Satmar Chassidut, are vehemently opposed to the usage of the Eruv, and they would never, ever, no matter what is up in the sky, would carry anything on Shabbat. Now, obviously, Netflix, the series, is using this as a symbolism, right? Esti is about to break free, so the Eruv is broken. This is part of her kind of exodus from Satmar, but it is a question why they choose to use something that is so known that Satmar is vehemently opposed to as the symbolism for breaking out. A second inaccuracy that you can see in the series is the clothing. So if throughout the series, I was a little bit taken aback by just how distastefully Esti and her other women that surround her are dressed in Williamsburg. And also the general look of the apartments, quite bare, quite simple, nothing very fancy, nothing very nice, everything kind of dim and gray and sad. Now, it's true that ultra-Orthodox women obviously have to be dressed they have to be strict and modest, but in Hasidic sects, and this is specifically for Hasidic communities, women are encouraged to dress nicely. So they dress in modest but beautiful fashion. They're allowed to wear nice looking wigs and jewelry. This is part of the culture. And this is in contrast to other ultra-Orthodox communities that where women have to dress very plainly. So the Hasidic women are known for their kind of beautiful dress. I always like to walk in Meir Sharim here in Jerusalem and also in Brooklyn and just look at what they managed to do with the modest codes, while other ultra-Orthodox community, if you know what the misnagdim are, so those that aren't Hasidic, dress really more plainly. And this was just the stark contrast of like, why is she dressed like this? Why can't there also be beauty in Williamsburg? The third error that it's an error / inaccuracy is the very intense sex scene where Esti and her husband are trying to have sex for the first time, and they are both fully clothed. And then when I read Deborah Feldman's book, she specifically writes that while she was wearing something, her husband was naked. And it's interesting because there are Hasiduyot like Gul, which isn't Satmar, a different one, that have very stringent very stringent rules about how you're allowed to have intercourse, and there you're supposed to be dressed. But this is not in Satmar. And Deborah in her book herself talks about how her husband was naked and what this scene was about. And all this made me think, why do they choose to dress him even though he's supposed to be naked? Why all these inaccuracies? What is happening in this series? So I think there is a push to kind of portray Williamsburg and Satmar with a lot of darkness and gloom, as I said, and skip over the more appealing, beautiful, or even complex sides of what it is to be in an ultra-Orthodox community. And one scene that I think this isn't an inaccuracy, but it portrayed this very well, what I'm trying to explain, is the wedding scene, where I think the series could have given Satmar and could have given this community just a little bit more credit. So if you remember, at the end of the wedding, the Rebbe gets up and he holds up the galtel, this long black string, to dance in front of the bride. This is called a mitzvah dance. It's mitzvah dance. It's supposed to make the bride happy. And what is actually happening in that moment is that the rabbi is praying for the bride and for the groom to have a good marriage. Now, for the secular viewers of Netflix, what we see here is there is something very disturbing. It's even a little bit sexist. She's covered. The rabbi is standing. Nothing is really happy in this moment. There's nothing very spiritual there. I felt even a little bit harassed, like there is harassment happening in this scene. What is happening? And it was a little bit sad for me that for any woman standing in that moment inside of a Satmar community, this is the moment where her rabbi is praying for her marriage. And just think about how it would be for you if Barack Obama or an iconic leader would be blessing you during your wedding. Yeah, he'd be praying for your marriage. That would be, I think, uplifting for you. And this is something that I think could have been portrayed a little bit better, that this is a moment that even if it's uncomfortable, it's sacred, right? But what we get is that we only feel what Esti is feeling. We only feel that she is feeling a little bit harassed and a little bit awkward. And I think that, in a sense, this is the essence of the series. Unorthodox is using the Satmar community as a theatrical scenery. The story could have easily been lifted to any other Orthodox community in any other faith. And the details of the community don't matter. What matters is the story, Esti's story, her journey, her life, which is, I mean, obviously for us, it's very interesting to kind of peek into the story, and I think it's a good story. But I do think that they could have made Satmar, they could have made the Orthodox world just a little bit more appealing, or just to see a little bit more of the complexity of leaving such a place. It's not all dim and gloom. There is some happiness in Satmar. There is beauty in religion. I just want to finish with a comment about the final scene. So many of you, when Esti gets up and sings, and she sings, the song that was sung in her wedding. And many people I read about this in a few blogs, that this is, Esti is reconnecting and making peace with her past. But if you look at their lyrics and what this song is about, so it's taken from a midrash, an explanation from the book, The Song of Songs, from the Bible, from the passage that is called like a lily among the thorns. So that's where the song, that's the source of what she is singing. And I think this is what Netflix is trying to say. It's trying to say that Esti was a lily among thorns. She managed to get out. She managed to create her life again. And I think that it's a bit of a myth, because Netflix could have also used Esti's story to also kind of give us maybe also the lily parts of Williamsburg, and not only portray Esti as a lily that is running away from a lot of thorns. But yeah, that's just how a few comments that I had about the series, and I'm curious to hear what questions we get now.
Thank you very much, Alissa. And yes, so all of you, you're very welcome now to type in questions, which I can then read out. Just as a response to Alissa, I mean, I do understand your criticism. I must say, I mean, I compared, for example, Stiesel, that Yaron mentioned, to Unorthodox. And I must say, I mean, Stiesel really sort of tugged much more at my heartstrings, because it it portrayed the community in a very complex, layered way, and everyone was much more sympathetic than in Unorthodox, where the community sort of remained this sort of cold place, and only Esti was the one that really drew sympathies. But perhaps to both of you, what do you think? Where does our fascination for watching sort of these films about very Orthodox communities come from? Perhaps Yaron, you can start.
Me?
Yes.
First of all, Alissa, I'm not exactly sure why you're not agreeing, where you're not agreeing with me, but I think we can't forget that this is, Miriam said it's loosely, but it is based on a personal story, someone's story that was written in a book and then adapted to this series. So it's obviously coming from a very particular, specific point of view, and it's. I don't think that the interest of the interest of the series makers were otherwise. But I think it ties into another thing that I said before and what Miriam asked about, which is that all of these shows about the Orthodox community have an anthropological aspect to them. Some of them more, some of them less. For example, Unorthodox had a lot of moments like that where you felt you're being educated about the ways of the religious, and I think that takes a little bit away from these programs. And even Rama Burstein, who's a competent director and her films are doing very well, has these kinds of moments, especially in her first film, Fill the Void. This is not something you will see in Shtisel, for example. You wouldn't see this, although we are told and introduced to a lot of customs and ways of doing things that are very different. It's never didactic, and it's never sort of shoved down your throat in any kind of, if anything, they're trying to make it more beautiful and, glamorize it. But really, it's a personal story. And the last point I will say that all of these shows and films are really made for the consumption of non-Orthodox audiences for whatever reason. In Unorthodox, it is the viewpoint of the author that transferred to the series, which is very negative. I guess I haven't read the book, but I'm assuming that her experience was very bad, and she's trying to convey that, and it colors everything in that series, I think.
Okay, we do have now some questions coming in from our viewers. The first question we had is, isn't it a bit worrisome that both the Unorthodox series as well as One of Us portrays the Orthodox community as a lunatic fringe?
I can answer that.
Okay.
I think that there is something, I mean, obviously when you're creating, and maybe Yaron can talk more about this, when Netflix is coming to create a series, they want to make it more sexy, more dramatic. They want to add some kind of content that will make more viewers come. And I think that's what makes them also look as a lunatic fringe, this extra adding of dramatic components. And I think it's up to us, the viewers, to be very critical about that, meaning there is beauty in Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox life. And we also have to give the people that are practicing this kind of life some credit. And I think that is something that Netflix hasn't managed to do, not in One of Us and not in Unorthodox. And it's the question of why can't we do complexity better? A question that I pose to Netflix rather than other films that were mentioned by Yaron, such as Shtisel and other series.
We have another question here. What do you think Hasidic viewers would think and feel if they were watching Unorthodox?
I think, Alissa, maybe you want to take that too.
You can't give her all the questions.
So this will be the last one, Yaron, and then you're next. I think, so there have been actually a lot of blogs and a lot of opinion pieces written by people that used to be in Satmil about Unorthodox, and a lot of them were a little bit disappointed, and they wrote that, like, this isn't the community that I was raised in, and while I decided to leave, it's a very happy community. There's a lot of love in the community, there's a lot of family in the community, and this isn't portrayed in the series. So I think that if somebody ultra-Orthodox were watching this series, definitely if people that left can say this, then I think that definitely people that are in the community would feel this. And I'll just mention that there is a trend today of books coming out of people that have left ultra-Orthodox communities, both here in Israel and in Brooklyn, not only from Satmil, but from other ultra-Orthodox communities. And there is a tendency in these books to flatten the community, to make it very evil in a way and very bad. And I think that this is okay because that was their individualistic experience. They had a very bad experience and that's why they left. But when you read these autobiographies, it's also like there's another whole community of 100,000 people and each one of them has a story to tell. And so we can't judge a community just by one narrative. I think that's what I would say.
We have another question for Alissa. Sorry, Yaron. The person, Yael, says, it's a great explanation on your part of the series. Can you give an example of a scene you would have changed if you had written this from your point of view?
Sure. I think one of the things, there's a scene where they're all sitting together at the table when they're when they got engaged, right, in the engagement or at the wedding. There's a scene with the whole family, and I think what I would add there is just some warmth, just something a little bit more. I don't know, like a rejoicing, something that where Esty is excited, or I would just add Esty's friends. Where are Esty's friends? Where's the gossip before the wedding, the excitement, the, oh my God, I'm gonna have sex for the first time, whatever it is, like it's not there. So I would just add something like that, just to give it a little bit more, we call it schmaltz in Judaism, in Yiddish, right? Just to more oil, a little bit more spice, just to show that there are these communications.
You know, can I say something, Miriam?
Absolutely.
I think that, you know, it's really interesting, Lisa, because you sound to me as if you were, I know you're not, but it sounds to me as if you were signing yourself to be the spokesperson for that community for a reason I don't understand exactly. In fact, one of the strengths of this series, in my opinion, is that it is able, and not just able, but willing to show a negative side of this community, which it would be very easy to show sort of like a romanticized side of this religious, sort of holistic community where everybody takes care of everybody else, and the family is very important and they're very closely knit, et cetera, et cetera. And it's much more difficult to come out and portray it in a negative kind of way, especially outside of Israel, especially outside of a comfort zone. And Netflix is not a comfort zone for these particular religious issues. And I don't think, on the other hand, Netflix is also is interested to go after specific religions and show their bad aspects. I just think it's they gave them a lot of space to do what they wanted to do. And this, from this perspective, I think it's very impressive of Netflix that they have allowed to do so, and in fact shows, you know, maturity in some ways. In other ways, it's not so mature, and when you watch the series, you are reminded, anyone who knows sort of older Israeli films, you're reminded of older Israeli films when you had moments of inauthenticity in those films that you felt, you know, this really doesn't work. And I think some of the questions we're getting, some of the things that you were saying, Alissa, is exactly about that, about moments of that you feel are not authentic. There's something kind of like off about them. But that has to do perhaps with the, you know, the unfamiliarity with the issue of the network and its dealing with it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not trying to be obviously the spokesman. I'm not in Satmar, and I would never choose to raise my children and myself in that community. And I think that there is a lot of criticism that should be said. And like, for example, the way that they treat her vaginismus is something that can happen and happens today in ultra-Orthodox communities all the time, and I wouldn't critique that. And I think that obviously there's a lot that is going wrong in these communities. My feeling was, and I'll take this back to your comment, Yaron, about what is happening between Netflix and the decision of how we're portraying a community, is that I think you could be very critical and still show all the criticism of the ultra-Orthodox community. And there's a lot of criticism. We can talk about how women lead their lives, what do they do, how arranged marriages happened, what is happiness, what is the place of the individual in the community, right? We can talk a lot about that, and I think Netflix does that. But at the same time, also show just a little bit more of the light. And so I think that was my main critique, that there just wasn't enough of that balance. But I definitely agree with you that there is a lot of place to critique, and I'm happy that Deborah's story and narrative has come out. I just would have liked to see more of maybe real life, like what is real life and what is it really to come out of Satmar? I think that would be my tweaking.
We have a question that two people have asked, Susanna and Ariel. They're asking about how realistic you find the show representations of Esti as seemingly obsessed with the Holocaust and hostile to Michal and her kind of Israeli Jewishness and sort of the way that the two different characters deal with the Holocaust.
I'd attempt to answer this. I have kind of like a bit of a cheeky answer, and that has to do with, I think this is slight incompetence of the scriptwriter, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know this, but as a viewer, this is what I felt. It felt unnatural, and it felt really, yes, there's a connection to her personal family story, but that kind of obsession with the Holocaust and that kind of, I would say, one flat characterization of the attitudes towards the Holocaust was really ranked false to me in the show, and I thought was gratuitous.
You have anything to add, Alissa?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with Yaron on that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have quite a few questions. I'm sort of trying to find the next one that come up. Yes, so Sandra asks, could you say something about how common it is for young people to leave the Haredi community?
Okay. It's hard to say statistically how many leave. I'd say that we always say that in the Orthodox community, it's one person out of each family. So if you have 4 children, one of them will be secular. And in the ultra-Orthodox community, it's like one out of like all the cousins will leave. I think that's the saying, but I will say that I don't know percentages globally. I'm sorry, haven't read those studies. But I will say that in Israel, we do know that the percentages are going a little bit up, but also they're having a lot of children. So the Haredi community is still really growing. But I'd say that there are more people that are leaving ultra-Orthodox communities. That is rising.
Okay. We have a question by Lena. What were the reactions, responses, and reviews of these films, Unorthodox by the Orthodox communities themselves? Perhaps Yaron, this is a question for you.
Yeah, this is interesting. The officially, of course, the Haredi community is not viewing television. They don't have television sets, and they're not not allowed certain kinds of phones that have these capabilities. At the same time, so it's very difficult, or more difficult, for that community to access films that are distributed through regular venues and not, for example, on TV. And films I've mentioned were not broadcast on TV initially. It is easier to watch a series such as Shtiso, for example, which was viewed by relatively many Haredi viewers in Israel at least, because it's streamed. But it's always done in a way that it's sort of like, it's not done in the open. It's not, the entire family doesn't sit to watch the show, but from what I understand, there's some articles published about this in the Israeli press around the time that the show came out, that it had a following in the Haredi community, and in fact, there was some kind of a game or a competition going on between these Haredi viewers to spot the inaccuracies in the show and see where they can say, well, you know, we don't say it this way, we don't do it this way, etc., etc. So it did have a penetration, but again, it's really hard to gauge that penetration because it's not official.
Okay. Next question. Did you notice any attempt to create parallels with the Western world, is a question asked by Junina. The scene in Berlin where Janke was taken to the bar and he was told that the girls should be better there to pleasure him. Do you think this was an attempt to show that the role of women in Western society is often extremely similar to the communities that described, the Orthodox community described?
Interesting. I mean, Alissa, I spoke twice already.
Okay. Alissa.
That's actually an amazing question. I haven't thought about that. I viewed that scene, and this is just my personal, like, how I read that scene as just trying to show where Moshe walks and what he does and what kind of character he is. I thought it was more about that. I definitely think that if I would give more credit to the series, then it could be that that's what it's trying to do, meaning that it's trying to show this parallel that, you know, not everything is all good and great in the Western world when we talk about women. And that would be interesting. I think also this ties to the criticism, which I think her name Yael, right, the Israeli receives from her conductor in front of everybody, right? How that is also done. So maybe there is a message here that's trying to be said that women, even in the Western world, where you think that they have freedom and everything, like we still see these unfortunate things happen. We see mansplaining and we see prostitution. So that's actually a really, really good point. Thank you, Janina. That's great.
Yeah, Alissa, I actually, the credit you just gave the show, can I take it back a little bit? And say that, I mean, it's going, I mean, it's referring to some of what you said in a little earlier on about the inability of the show to portray a nuance, and it's not very layered. And I think it was an easy choice it's appeared to me as a viewer again that it's an easy choice of going to sort of an extremity of showing something just because it was easy and they want to make this kind of like black and white point. I mean, it could very well be just that.
Yeah.
We have another short question. What do you think might be the effect of such a series on how Jews are perceived in society more broadly? A question by Tobias.
Yeah, you see, here I think I want to say again what I said before about the maturity of a network such as Netflix to come out with a film that it's very comfortable, it seems very comfortable doing it, showing us a community that would have perhaps in the past been treated with sort of kid gloves, but it is now treated in all kinds of way, including a negative way, and without any kind of problem doing that. And I think that should be really the hallmark of a streaming platform that is seriously interested in providing a very variegated and expressive and representative kind of cultural products. And it's okay to show this part of the Jewish community in a bad way. There's nothing wrong about that. Good films, the best films really are very critical films. And we wouldn't ask this question, for example, about films that criticize the American political system or the capitalist system or whatever. We don't ask these kinds of questions. We do ask these questions about the Jewish community for obvious reasons, but I think the fact that the network is willing to show this kind of series actually points at the maturity of the network and what it thinks about its audiences. And I don't think it's, fearing any kind of finger pointing. All
right, I'm going to ask a very simple question. Who was your favorite actor in Unorthodox?
Well, Alissa, favorite actor.
I can start if you want. My absolute favorite was Moshe. Moshe, played by Jeff Wimbush. I thought it was great. I actually did a bit of Facebook stalking, and I found that he still had an unprotected Facebook account. You could still befriend him. I didn't quite dare, but
Is he American?
yes, yeah, no, he's an Israeli-German actor.
See.
Yes, but I thought his portrayal of Moshe was fantastic, because that was one of the few very, very complex characters who showed all sorts of possible facets of human nature.
I actually like the husband very much. I thought he was, he played the verklempt in the German sense, not in the American Saturday Night Live sense. You know, he was kind of like a really, Miriam, what's a verklempt? Something who's stopped up, right? Something who is somebody who's, very anxious. And you can see that the guy is a bundle of nerves, and he's totally lost. He's under the thumb of his mother and sisters. And he doesn't know how to sort of connect with his wife or with the world. And I think he did it very, very well.
Yeah.
Lisa?
I have to agree with Miriam. I thought Moshe was brilliant. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're drawing to a close. Unfortunately, our time is up, but we had a lot of questions which we couldn't answer. There were sometimes also quite long statements, and I was wondering whether the people who wrote those statements could perhaps copy them into our Facebook thread, and then, you know, Alissa and Yaron could perhaps answer one or two more if they felt like it, or we could enter into a sort of a conversation among the various participants of the webinar. But I think we have to stop here, and I would like to thank Yaron and Alissa very, very much to come along and to talk to you today. And I would also like to thank you very much for being a fantastic webinar audience. We've had a sort of a flurry of questions today, and I'm very sorry we couldn't answer all of them. But you're most welcome to come along to our webinars, sort of future webinars of the series. Next week, I think we're talking about the two popes. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll talk about Messiah. And I really hope we'll see you again there. Keep well, everyone, and hopefully see you next week. Bye. Bye.